So this is an example of how technology is wonderful when everything works, but it can become problematic. I'm going to text the people that texted me to tell them I'm back really quickly. I thought that it would focus on the screen, the camera, but I noticed when I was over here writing, it focused on me. All right, so I got that, and I got, hold this up. All right, so we're back live on YouTube. So a couple of reasons that I show you this. So we're going to talk about integrated marketing communication today, and what I want you to think about is how you can use, a consistent theme that I've had throughout this course is how you can use this in your own life. How can you develop your own integrated marketing communication and make it effective? And so one of the things that she focuses on is obviously a job interview. That is your opportunity to use your integrated marketing communication skills that you develop in this class to come up and present a holistic approach. And so there are a number of things that she pointed out that I wanted to touch on, and I brought the ducks today, so we'll have ducks. For those of you in the extended class, because I can't see you, if you would send me a text to be sure that you get the bonus points. If you want to participate, I'll try and read as many of the comments as I can from those. Even if I don't get your comment even if I don't get your comment read in class, I will of course give you bonus points. I think for those of you that have been participating on YouTube, you're used to that. For those of you that are in the WebEx, you're welcome to talk, and if I can hear you, I'll try and respond. It's probably easier if you text me your response, because that way I do know, and if you haven't texted me before, be sure and put your name. For those of you that have been in the extended class on YouTube, I have your name in my directory already, because you can tell me what it is. But I want everybody to get an opportunity to get the most bonus points that they can get, because we're going to have an opportunity here with the Critical Thinking Challenge today to do that, and then probably again on Tuesday. So I brought the ducks, so if you are in the extended class, be sure and text me. So you can use this in your own life, and you can incorporate this idea and this science into your own integrated marketing communication plan when you go out in the world and you try to get a job, right? And you're trying to do interviews. So a couple of things that I wanted to point out. I go on job interviews every year. I go on the market every single year. I'm constantly looking for a better job, and I think you should be too. You should always be willing and able and out there and looking. The average person now will switch not just jobs. When my grandparents went into the workforce, they went to work for a company and they stayed with that company for 20 years and then they drew a pension, right? And that's the way people did. That's not the way it works now. Generally speaking, if you want a promotion or you want to make more money, you have to go and get another job. And so these are skills that you should start practicing right now. Start practicing your interview skills. And students tell me that they are absolutely horrified of interviewing. It's amazing to me how many of my seniors, not my sales students are well trained at this because they go to a lot of sales competitions, and there are a lot of job interviews, opportunities at those in terms of the career fair. But my general marketing students and my general business students and students in other classes tell me, that they're seniors and they're like, I haven't had very many interviews. You should go on interviews. And I don't know why you are so hesitant to go on an interview. Think about this. One of the reasons I love to interview, and every year I go on the job market and every year I get job offers. Some are, there was one that I was actually going to take, and then my mother developed breast cancer, and so I wasn't able to ultimately take the job. Some are at schools that make better offers than UCO pays, and some have not, and I've had to decline those offers. But the one that I really wanted was in Florida, and then my mother had this problem, and I was ultimately not able to take it. But I love to go on job interviews because it's the only time in your life, think about this, that people are completely focused on you. They want to hear about you. You get to talk about yourself. My job interviews are my favorite because it is, for academics, when you go on an academic job interview, it's always an all-day or two-day process. And it's a whole day of doing nothing but being able to talk about yourself. And I am my own favorite person. I'm my own favorite subject. So it's the only time in life that people really want to hear about you. When people come up to you at a cocktail party, one of the first things that they'll ask you, and I've told you this before, is what do you do? And it's not because they care about you. It's because it's an opportunity for them to either talk about themselves or to judge you, to figure out where you rank on the social ladder, right? But in a job interview, these people are completely focused on you. It's your opportunity to talk about yourself. So do that. Take those opportunities. Go to the career fairs when we have them. We have one coming up in the spring through the department that you should take advantage of. Our sales career fair. Even if you don't want a sales job, think about it and go and learn and have an opportunity to talk to companies and make them aware of your skills. I wanted to ask, because this was about the science of communication and two key hormones that play into how effectively or how well we communicate, particularly with our nonverbals, testosterone and cortisol. So there are a couple of interesting things about this, particularly with regard to the cortisol component that she talks about. So cortisol is a necessary hormone. It regulates a lot of our body. It regulates and it leads to muscle development and muscle growth and joint health and things like that. If you have too low of cortisol levels and your body doesn't produce enough, you have a disease called Addison's disease. And probably you've never heard of this, but you know somebody, a famous person who had it, and it was John F. Kennedy. He was suffering from Addison's disease, so he didn't produce enough cortisol. As a result, it can be fatal, by the way, Addison's disease can be fatal, and he was extremely risky. It can lead to immune compromised positions, and it can lead to deterioration in joint and bone health. He had a bad back as a result of the condition, and that may have been one of the things. There's a hypothesis that ultimately led to his being fatally shot in Dealey Plaza in 1963, because he was riding in a limousine and he had a back brace on, and the first bullet was not a fatal shot. It probably, he would have fallen over and probably would have been protected by the car and the Secret Service. But because he had a back brace on, there's a theory that held him up straight, and that allowed the shooter to have a couple more shots at him and ultimately led to the fatal brain injury. So if you have too much cortisol, it results in a disease called Cushing's syndrome. People with Cushing's syndrome get fat in the face. They get a fat lump on their neck. In the midsection, they tend to carry weight. Horses, by the way, are oftentimes susceptible to Cushing's. About 50% of horses over the age of 14 have some variation of Cushing's. So it's an incredibly important hormone, but it's incredibly important that it be sort of balanced. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about with regard to this is not only in terms of communication, but as a society, we can think of communication as the way society communicates to individuals, not just the way individuals communicate to each other and the way individuals communicate to society, but also the way society is communicated to us. And so I want to circle back to a theme that I brought up before, and we talked about in what it is you can know and how you can know it. A book called Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, right? And I told you that was written by a guy who has a very suspect PhD, but he points out a general truism. Now, one of the things that she points out in this video is that, not surprisingly, right, men are more assertive in many instances. Women are the ones that tend to go like this rather than like this, right? They tend to be the ones that will do this. They tend to be the ones that will wrap up and shrink. Is that, and this is the first critical thinking challenge, is that nature or nurture that is the driving force behind women being less assertive, women having less power in many instances. So is this inborn, or is it something that we have created societally?
That's what's created.
You think it's created? Why do you think it's created?
I just feel like, well, over the course of
I sanitize the ducks, by the way.
I just think more like it's kind of ingrained into society as where women are more kind of caretakers, I guess, and they're kind of trying to be nice and not be kind of like a big personality, like a big ego, I'd say, whereas guys are more from birth, we're taught to be this macho person, be big and tough and try to be the standout guy in the room.
Okay. Yes.
I think if you look like even in the 1950s with like what the family was supposed to look like, it almost like ingrained women of like what their role was, just in society.
Okay, so you go back to sort of the portrayal of women in things like movies and television and what women were supposed to do, what roles were acceptable to them. I believe it's nurture. Society has taught women to be caregivers and soft-spoken. All right, I think that's true. Nature presently, nurture in ancient years probably. So, Mr. New, I guess you're saying that you think that there's a component of it, this is from the extended section, that is nature, in that women are obviously, and we talked about this when I talked about men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and we talked about equality, right, and the census of equality, in that if we took two sort of body types that are similar, it doesn't work if you take somebody who is, you know, a 110-pound male and is 5'2" and put him up against a female who is sort of ectomorphic and 6'1" and send them off to the gym and do the experiment. But if you take two people of sort of similar body composition and you send them off to the gym, who's going to get muscle mass? And this is one of the things that Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus points out is, you know, like obviously the man is going to, he doesn't explicitly point out this example, but I mean, these are the kinds of things that he talks about in that book. Obviously, the man's going to lose weight faster. He's going to gain muscle mass faster. And so maybe there is this nature component to it. But is it largely nature or is it largely nurture? And so you're suggesting that maybe currently, I guess I got it backward, nature presently, nurture in ancient years. So you're saying that maybe there's still some biological or physiological differences, but historically we've socialized women to be different. And I think that's a valid observation, because one of the things that's interesting in this last election is for the first time, we thought perhaps in 2016 that the glass ceiling for women would be shattered with the election of Hillary Rodham Clinton, right? And she lost. She lost the Electoral College, although she won the popular vote by 3 million people. And we're really behind. We hold ourselves out as this sort of vaunted bastion of democracy and liberalism, and I mean liberalism not in terms of liberal spending the way the Republicans would mean it, but I mean in terms of enlightened thought, not liberalism in the parochial sense, but liberalism in sort of the best tradition of equality, liberty, fraternity, right? Those ideals that we hold ourselves up to. And we think we're this bastion, and yet we're one of the democracies that's been last to have a woman shatter that glass ceiling. India had a female prime minister long before the United States had a woman. We've just now, in 2020, had a woman ascend to the vice presidency. She's not even at the top. And forever and ever and ever, a lot of people who held the office of the vice presidency described it as the lowliest position on earth. One vice presidential office holder described it as not worth a warm bucket of spit. In terms of, it has absolutely no job title for most of our countries or job duties except to preside over the Senate, which they never do unless there's a close vote and there's going to be a tie, right? For most of our country's history, the vice president was seen as having the job of waking up every morning and saying, how's the president? And if the answer was the president is doing fine, you could go back to bed, right? Now, some vice presidents have become more powerful, but there's no clearly defined power roles in the Constitution for the vice president other than the presiding officer of the United States Senate, which I've suggested they don't really do in modern time, right? That's not what they're doing. So we haven't even gotten there in terms of having a woman in the oldest contemporary democracy in the world, or what we view as, we're not really a democracy, and I've made that argument before, but we hold ourselves out as this democracy, right? Britain has had 2 prime ministers before we've had a woman president. Germany has had a woman chancellor, which is the top political role, the top governmental role in that country before we have. After the 2020 election, they took a poll in Western countries, and to this day, a slight majority of people still suggest that they are uncomfortable with a woman being in the top leadership position of power in a nation. And that's not just in the United States, and it was in a vast majority of Western nations as well, that people felt this way. And I think a lot of it is the way we have socialized as a nation, the way we have organically, in an organic way, socialized women to think. And if you go back to your example of television and movies in the 1950s, women were taught that you should, don't be too smart. I experienced this at an early age, and I remember this. I was 7 years old. I'm one of these people that I had 2 friends for most of my life, right? I always formed very intense, close personal relationships, but I didn't have a lot of friends. I always had 1 or 2 very close friends. And all through my years growing up in New Mexico until I moved to Oklahoma, my 2 best friends were Monty Winker and Desiree Ortiz. These were my best friends. And I remember Monty lived just down the road from me. Desiree lived a couple of blocks over. And I can remember going to his house for dinner one night, and they were having meatloaf and mashed potatoes, which was one of my favorite meals. It's probably one of the reasons that I am fatter than I should be, because I love all things potato chips, potato slices, baked potatoes, mashed potatoes, au gratin potatoes. Any way you can make a potato, I really like it. And there's almost no nutritional benefit to potatoes, right? It's empty calories. And his mother was a teacher, well-educated, master's degree. His father was a BLM officer. My father was an FBI agent. That's how we had that sort of kind of fathers in law enforcement in common. And his mother said, Grant, Monty, do you want some more mashed potatoes? You're growing boys. Again, remember that mashed potatoes have almost no nutritional value. And he had 3 sisters. And his sister Shannon spoke up and said, well, I'll have some mashed potatoes. And what was her mother's response to that, would you guess? Anybody?
I didn't ask you or something like that.
What?
Like I didn't ask you or something like that.
Not that you didn't ask her. You'll get fat.
Yeah.
What are you trying? Do you want to get fat? That was the response. Subtle differences like that. And the way we socialize children can have enormous impacts on whether or not a girl does this or does this in class. Historically speaking, women were relegated, if you were going to work outside the home, to a handful of professions. If you wanted to have a learned profession, if you wanted to go to college, there were 2 that you could basically have. What were they? Nurse and teacher. My master's thesis advisor here was a woman named Sharon Carney. And when she went to college, she said, they asked her, oh, what do you want to major in? She said, political science. And the registrar said, girls don't become political scientists. You can either major in nursing or education. We'll put you down as a nursing major. And Sherry Carney told me years later when she was my professor, she said, I went through all 4 years at OU being categorized as a nursing major. I never took one. She said, I just took the paper and I knew that if I put together enough courses to complete the degree, they couldn't deny me the degree, but they were never going to let me declare my major as a political science. So she went through 4 years, imagine this, 4 years as a nursing student, never took a nursing course, and graduated with a political science degree. When I first started teaching here at UCO, my office was in Thatcher Hall. It was in Thatcher Hall most recently, and now I've moved back into the college business building. But I was in the economics hallway, and there was one female economist in the department at that time. Her name was Jean Caldwell. And she looked like Mrs. Santa Claus. She looked like 3 little concentric circles. She had this little round head with little white curls that you just picture as Mrs. Santa Claus, a little round middle section in her belly, and then like this little round legs. And she kind of, waddled like you'd think Mrs. Claus would waddle. And she used to come over to my office because I had a coffee pot in my office, and she would come in and grab coffee. And one day I just asked her, I said, why did you become an economist? I mean, economics is dominated by men. And she said, well, I didn't go to school to get a degree at all. I went to get the Mrs. degree, the MRS. And I got 3/4 of the way through a bachelor's degree before I found a husband. And I quit when I found a husband, but I decided I didn't like him. So I went back and, to find another husband, and I completed the bachelor's degree, and I completed most of a master's degree before I decided I didn't like that husband. And then I had a kid, and so now I'm teaching. I completed my master's degree so I could get more money in teaching. And then I decided I didn't like teaching Rugrats in the 5th grade, and so I decided I'd better go get a PhD so I could teach college. But she never thought about that as being an option. If you don't tell people it's an option, if they don't think about it, it doesn't become a possibility, right? And so I think we have to think about the way we as a society engage in this organic sort of communication and this holistic approach to things. So she talks about a number of other things. They did this experiment. My mother was part of she was getting her master's degree at New Mexico Highlands. She was a high school administrator. And they did this experiment with bullies in her school, and in a number of other schools across the state of New Mexico. She was part of this research team, where they took bullies and they asked them, what is a good student? Because bullies are generally not students that do well in school, right? And they asked them, what are the traits of a good student? And what do you think these bullies said were the traits of a good student? What do good students do?
You're quiet.
They're quiet? Well, they speak when they're spoken to, right?
Get good grades.
They get good grades. They study. They do their homework. They turn it in on time. What else do good students do? I used to tell students this, and it used to be very true. This is the A row. This is the B row. That's the C row. It's true. Good students have a tendency, and these bullies knew that. They knew that good students had a tendency to do what? Sit on the first row. And historically, that's been true. I can tell you that there is a difference by where you sit in terms of grade distribution in a class. They participate in class, right? They're not disruptive. They participate. And so they made these lists. And then they told these kids, we want you to pretend to be a good student for 2 weeks. And they did. And 85% of them turned out to be better students at the end of that. So these small things can make a huge difference. She suggests that you should do power posing in, 2 minutes before a job interview. If you don't have 2 minutes, if you don't think you can go to, a lot of my students, when I've shown this video, they're like, Dr. Geary, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna go into the bathroom where other people, do this for 2 minutes? You can do it. Start the day that you get up for the job interview by being positive. Stand up straight. Sit your car seat up straighter in the car so that you sit up. And pay attention. Do a power pose in the car as you're driving to the job interview. You'd be amazed at how much difference it makes. She talked about in this video that watching physician interactions, they record physicians without the sound on, and watching their nonverbal communication, their body language, can lead to predictions of whether or not a physician is going to be sued. We see a similar pattern in sales. Lots of companies who have really well-trained sales forces and have good salespeople maybe don't have the absolute best product. But people are they're more willing to buy from someone that they like than someone that they don't. And they're more, they're more willing to allow you, if you have a services failure with the product or service that you're selling, if they like you, to give you an opportunity to recover from that than they are if they don't, right? So it's not necessarily just all about the quality. Perception, what this tells us, what this study tells us with regard to the physicians and whether or not they're going to be sued, is that perception in the mind of the consumer is reality. If you think your doctor is doing a good job, whether or not they are, impacts your ability. And by the way, there are studies that also suggest that whether or not you have trust and faith in your doctor impacts the way you heal. Because just like she said that the mind can have an impact on the body and the body can have an impact on the mind, your mind, if you think you're likely to get well because you like your physician, you're more likely to have an easier recovery. Some studies suggest that, right? So these things have enormously powerful impacts on the way we can handle things. She talked about one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and one of the things that we have to think about when we talk about integrated marketing communications, and you have to think about when you're developing your own personal integrated marketing communication plan, is the use of emoticons. She said in negotiation, now this is one of the things that has really happened that I've really not thought would be something that would occur, but even business communications, because we have become so addicted to these devices, we have started negotiating business deals on these devices by text message and things like that. And she said that emoticons used well in online negotiations can have enormously big impacts on rewards. Used poorly, they can have really big impacts in the opposite direction, negative impacts, right? So one of the things that you have to think about is that the written word is notoriously, in many instances, ambiguous. How is it that we evaluate what people are saying? A lot of it is their body language, isn't it? It's the nonverbals that we're getting. I'm really excited to be here versus I am really excited to be here, right? It's a difference in the way I looked, the inflection in the voice and the tone. That's really difficult to communicate in written words, isn't it? Because it's notoriously, if you just say fine can mean, like, okay, I'm good with it. Or, as most of us who have been married know, when it comes out of our partner's mouths, fine, that's not necessarily right. But in a text message, that can be ambiguous. Did you mean you're really okay with this, or are you just sort of saying that you're okay with this? And so in order to overcome that, because we've all become addicted to these devices, we're now using emojis in our text messages. I had a student when I first started letting students text me, say, I'm not going to be in class, and he suggested that his spouse, his wife, was, having difficulties that day, and then he followed it up with a bunch of emojis, and I just thought, don't text, no, like, no, TMI, no, don't let me, I don't need to know that, right? I mean, think about this, think about what you're saying in text and how you're using it. It's enormously powerful or can be enormously detrimental, right? So promotion is the fourth element of the marketing mix. And unlike price, where there is no unifying theory as to what we should be doing, there is a unifying theory with regard to the fourth element, and it is integrated marketing communication. Now, if you went back in time, again, historically, we would teach disparate courses on this topic. We would teach things like public relations. And there are still public relations. You can go over to the communications department and they still teach public relations courses over there for people who want to go out and basically be spokesmen. Where do you see this kind of spokesman being used? Well, you see it a lot in political advertising, right? You see a lot of, so a lot of people get degrees in communication and they'll go into the political marketplace, right? Into promotion. Because a lot of what political candidates do is they can't rely necessarily or wholly on paid advertising, right? So they're going to have to engage in public relations, in spin, in the spin room. And how you do that is enormously important. Speaking with a consistent voice is enormously consistent. George W. Bush was probably one of the first and the best to recognize this. He was not, I don't believe he was born in Texas, but he was raised in Texas. His father came to Texas from the East Coast, but his father, unlike George W., never quite settled in to Texas lifestyle and culture the way George W. did. The family was from the East Coast. They still have a big compound in Kennebunkport, Maine, and that's where his parents preferred to be. But it's cold in Maine, and his father had decided to go into the oil business. If you're going to do that, you go to Texas, right? That's where the big oil headquarters are, in Houston or in Oklahoma, in places like Ponca City and Bartlesville. So he went to Texas to be in the oil field. His father had been a United States, George Herbert Walker Bush, this is the senior Bush's father, had been a United States Senator, I think from Connecticut, if I'm right, but I may have that wrong. But he'd been a United States Senator, he goes to Texas. W really does more embrace. He's largely raised there and more embraces it. He did tell a slight lie in his run against Ann Richards when he was running for governor. They asked, "What's the difference between you and your father?" And he said, "My father went to Andover. I went to San Jacinto High." That's not exactly true. He went through junior high at San Jacinto. He didn't go to high school. He did go to a boarding school for high school, and then college at Yale and a Harvard MBA. He ran against a West Texas congressman in his first race. It was the only race W ever lost. And he was beaten by being painted as a patrician Eastern carpetbagger who had come to Texas and used his family's vast resources to steal the election. It was a trick that never worked again on him. When he ran for governor of Texas against Ann Richards, she was the most popular governor in America at the time. She was very outspoken, irreverent, pretty, funny, and extraordinarily knowledgeable. She had a 78% approval rating in her own home state the year that he started to run against her. But he took his experience in that first contest and realized that he would do two things. First of all, he would never allow somebody else or the opposition to define who he was. And that's an important part of integrated marketing communication, is to never allow somebody else to define who you are. He would define who he was, and he would speak with a consistent message. At the time that he ran against Ann Richards, the crime rate had been dropping steadily in the United States, but they noticed that people in polls had suggested that one of their biggest concerns was crime. They didn't feel safe. Hope and fear pervade American political life, right? You can create fear and then you provide hope. Now, it's interesting because the crime rate had been dropping for all of those years. And why was the crime rate dropping in Texas and in other places in all of those years? Well, it was from a number of factors. First of all, in 1992, Bill Clinton was elected. The economy, people thought that the economy was going to get better. I'm not saying that Clinton was totally responsible for that, but the economy is largely psychologically driven, right? If you hear on the news and the newscasters tell you that we're headed for an economic recession, we're coming into the biggest buying season of the year, right? Which is Christmas. 50% of all retail sales are related to this time of year, this time of year, right? What are you going to do right now? I mean, what are your spending patterns going to be with regard to Christmas this year, as we're facing an unprecedented world pandemic, as we're facing a transition in our national government, which is enormously disputed and unsettled at the current time, and we're facing job loss if the pandemic isn't controlled, which will wreck our economy. What happens to most people when they hear those kinds of things with regard to buying? Goes up or goes down?
It goes down
It goes down. Why?
because they're scared to lose money and they don't want to, like if the recession does hit them, they want to have those savings to
Right.
rely on.
That's exactly correct. When you hear things like that, you start to, now consumer spending in some areas has actually gone up, but historically, when you hear things like that, you have these ideas that maybe I need to save. This is not the year to buy my kids the new dirt bike or the new Xbox. We're going to have to, cut back, right? And that can lead to a self-fulfilling cycle in the economy. So Bush picks up on this fact that it's largely psychologically driven, that even though the crime rate is going down year after year after year, people's perception and the reality is that crime is getting worse, right? Even though it had been going down, why it had been going down? Well, there's a number of reasons. The economy is good. During the Clinton years, there was the longest stretch of economic prosperity that we'd ever had. Another factor that occurred was the aging of America. We were getting older, right? The younger population was becoming a lesser percent of the population who commits crime. It's generally not people in my age group, right? It's people in what? Your age group that commits crime, right? So you had good economy, older population, crime going down. There was an anomaly, though, for about 2 years prior to Bush being running against Ann Richards and being elected. They had just begun to disaggregate juvenile crime in the crime statistics. So when they reported crime by categories, right? By burglary, violent crime, murder, arson, things like that, right? But they had never disaggregated juvenile crime out of that crime statistic. And so for the 2 years prior, it appeared that juvenile crime was on the rise. George W. became enormously fixated on that number. You could ask him what time of day it was, and out would come the stock answer: we must cure juvenile crime in Texas. He had people believing that there were hordes of feral children in the streets ready to rape, pillage, and plunder at any given moment. It was a remarkable thing. And he defeated the most popular, not only in our own state, but the most popular governor nationally at the time in Texas, by simply being on message, by creating a reality. Donald Trump, by the way, whether or not you like him or voted for him or didn't, he is in some ways an enormously disciplined politician. He says this, George W. Bush was one of the first ones to, it didn't matter what the moderator asked. He was going to answer the question he wished you had asked, right? And they do that all the time now. Donald Trump has been enormously effective in staying on message, and that message is that it's the liberal fake news media, and for a year before this election, he's been on this mantra that the election is what? It's rigged, right? And he's got people believing it. If you say it enough times, if you are consistent enough in the message, in spite of the fact that all of the statistics showed there was no crime problem in Texas when Ann Richards, she had actually increased the number of beds in Stripe City under her watch and had increased the penalties for a number of crimes, which a lot of people said we shouldn't do. And by the way, we're now looking at these things, and although it didn't pass in Oklahoma this time, the criminal sentencing reform, I think it will in the future, when we realize that we just cannot continue to sustain that level of people incarcerated for nonviolent crimes. But enormously disciplined in that message. He became a master at it. So in integrated marketing communication, use the promotional mix and use all of the tools in that mix. Advertising, sales promotion, public relations, to personal selling, direct media, direct selling, to persuade your customers, your constituent, or the person you're trying to get a job from, to try it and then to ultimately purchase it. And then to remind them of those benefits that they enjoyed. So from a personal perspective, to remind your boss, once you get the job, why it is that you should either keep the job or get a raise, right? And a program that coordinates all of the promotional activities to speak with a consistent, unified voice is integrated marketing communication. Now, a lot of practitioners have suggested that integrated marketing communication is a fad thought up by academics, but I will tell you that if you do not come up with a consistent image of what you want to project for your product or yourself, your consumer will come up with that image for you. And it may not be the image that you want to portray, right? So it's enormously important to speak with this sort of consistent voice. So the communication process. Let's think about this in terms of you as a communicator wanting to get a job, a job candidate, right? So you're going to put together materials that's encoding using a medium like a resume to apply for the job. You're going to fill out the job application that everybody has, and then they're probably going to ask you for various articles like a resume or a CV is what we call it in higher education. And you're going to put that together, and then you're going to send it off. So you're going to send this resume off, and the receiver is then going to decode it, right? And then they're going to encode a message, and that message may be stunned silence. And what does that tell you? You weren't selected, right? You're going to decode that message, and then, so this is the feedback loop. Now, a lot can happen in here, and a lot goes on with encoding, and then a lot in here with regard to noise. What can go wrong in the encoding process? Well, George Lakoff, in a book called Moral Politics, gives us an example of this, right? He gives us an example of what happens in encoding. The Republican Party, starting with Ronald Reagan, and this is really, really remarkable, Ronald Reagan really mobilizes the Christian evangelical movement to become political. Prior to Ronald Reagan, the Christian evangelical movement had viewed itself as being sort of apolitical. And if you think about this in a historical context, that makes sense. If you go back, I mean, Christian theologians, going back to Augustine, have recognized the difference in Augustine's The City of God. He talks about two cities, right? There's the city of God and there's the city of man. And for most of human history, particularly in the United States, Christianity has viewed itself as, the politics is the city of man and we're more concerned with the city of God. Reagan actually changes that. to a big degree. Actually, Jimmy Carter starts it because Jimmy Carter is the first candidate to identify himself and talk about his religion, but Reagan really catches on to it, and he's the one who really mobilizes this force. Carter awakens it, and the interesting thing about this is that who was the only president up to that point in time to not regularly attend church and not identify with a specific faith? Anybody want to guess? It's Ronald Reagan, right? Jimmy Carter was a devout what? Southern Baptist. But Reagan is the one who really, really mobilizes this. And you get ministers like television evangelists like Pat Robertson who start with and define a policy program in his what he called the moral majority, right? This idea of being against being pro-life and against abortion on issues of public policy, right? And that the abortion movement was the first big thing that really motivated the Christian right to start becoming involved. As part of this promotion of this policy, they talk about family values, right? They use this term family values. What does that mean to the religious right when they talk about family values? What do they mean by family values? Anybody? Y'all still there? Anybody up live on YouTube? Got 8 people.
Like the classic family values that was created after the war, where the wife stays at home, works with kids are well mannered, her husband comes back from work, they go to church every day, blah blah blah, they don't cuss.
Right. Mr. Morrison says that's the traditional American dream. I think those are both correct answers. The important things in life, he followed it up with the important things in life. Yes, the classic nuclear family model, which was called the strong father model, by the way. It is the hearkening back to the Ward Cleaver, who came home. I don't think it was ever very clear what Ward did for a living, but Mrs. Cleaver obviously didn't, because she was perpetually vacuuming and dusting in high heels and pearls in the television series. And I think modern feminists have suggested that perhaps she would have been more comfortable if she had been in sweats and a t-shirt, right? I mean, that is what Republicans mean by family values. Democrats say they have family values too, right? But they mean something completely different by it. When they talk about family values, what they're focusing on is this idea, and Hillary Clinton wrote a book based on an African proverb called "It Takes a Village." It's the extended family, right? It's not Father Knows Best. That was a television show, by the way, in the 1950s. My Three Sons, Leave It to Beaver, all of those programs where the wife stayed at home. In all of those programs, who was the first, anybody know this? It's a Trivial Pursuit question. The first couple to be shown in bed together. This is a Trivial Pursuit question. I bet nobody will get this. The first couple to be shown in bed. At that point in time, Ward and June Cleaver had single beds with a nightstand between them. In the movies, they had censors where if there were a man and a woman in a bedroom scene, both of them had to have at least 1 foot on the floor, right? These were the sorts of rules that we abided by. The first family to be shown in bed, or the first couple to be shown in bed together, were the Munsters. By the way, that's the Trivial Pursuit answer. And Democrats say, well, it's about extended family. It's about aunts and uncles and grandma and grandpa, and maybe people that are not even related to us by blood, that are friends, that that we associate with maybe more closely than we do with our own nuclear family. I'm out of time, so we'll stop there. We'll pick up with this, and we'll talk about advertising and promotion next time. And I will see you. If you talked, I don't know who talked to me on WebEx, so if you'll send me a text message so I can give you your bonus points. For those of you who got ducks, come see me. I will turn this off and I will do those right now. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube who send text messages in, as soon as I get to my office, I will update those bonus points for your participation today as well. Thanks.